People like you cannot even afford to touch these cars." The words hung in the air of the luxury car showroom like a stain. They did not slip out by accident. They were delivered with purpose, clear enough for every guest sipping champagne and every salesman polishing chrome to hear. The speaker was the showroom director himself, a man in a navy suit cut to fit his ambition, standing tall behind the velvet rope that marked the display floor, his arms folded, his tone final. He looked at her and dismissed her with a single sentence. At the center of that room stood a black woman in a burnt orange dress. Her hair was pulled back, her stance steady, her eyes calm. She carried no designer bag, no glittering jewelry, only a small leather purse and a tablet tucked under one arm. To him, she looked out of place. To everyone else, she looked like a customer who had just been insulted. But what no one in that showroom realized yet was that she was more than a customer. She was the woman who could decide the future of their sales, their contracts, their very survival. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change. And we are glad you are here. Now, back to her. The director's smirk widened as silence stretched. "These models are not for browsing. They are for buyers, real buyers," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. A few guests chuckled. One man shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Behind the front desk, a young assistant froze, her hand hovering over the keyboard, eyes darting between the director and the woman he had just tried to erase. She did not move. She did not defend herself. Her hand rested lightly on the tablet, her gaze fixed on the man who had just written his own downfall. Silence was not weakness. It was her weapon. She had learned that years ago when a hotel clerk told her the lobby was not for people like her. She had learned it again when a banker treated her signature as a forgery. She had seen this script play out too many times, and she had rewritten the ending every single time. From the far corner, a teenager raised his phone. The red light blinked to life, recording every word. Another guest whispered, "This is not right," but stayed rooted in place, unsure whether to intervene. The air, once filled with the muted hum of jazz and the scent of leather interiors, now carried something different, the charged tension of an insult too loud to ignore. The director leaned in closer, lowering his voice but sharpening his edge. "If you want pictures, try the lobby. In here, we deal with serious money." His eyes flicked down her dress again, then back up, as if to say she had already failed his unspoken test. A ripple of unease spread across the floor. The assistant behind the desk pressed her lips together, the muscles in her jaw tightening. She knew what was happening was wrong, but she had seen enough to know that speaking up carried its own risks. Still, the woman in orange did not break her silence. She adjusted the strap of her purse and let the room breathe its arrogance. To the director, she looked like a nuisance to be cleared away. To the crowd, she looked like a question waiting to be answered. And to herself, she looked like exactly what she was. The storm gathering in plain sight, patient, inevitable, and ready to strike. She had walked into the showroom without fanfare. No chauffeur had opened the door for her. No entourage had followed in her steps. She came alone, her heels striking the marble with quiet certainty. The burnt orange dress she wore was deliberate, not bright enough to shout, not dull enough to disappear. It carried the weight of calm fire, a presence that did not need introduction. The luxury car showroom itself gleamed like a museum of speed. Polished chrome reflected the chandelier lights, every curve of the vehicles polished to perfection. Guests in tailored suits drifted from one display to another, murmuring about horsepower, leather trims, and waiting lists that stretched months long. For them, the showroom was a stage for wealth. For her, it was a stage for truth. She approached the front desk with measured steps. Behind it, the director already looked annoyed, as if her presence interrupted the rhythm of his evening. Two sales associates flanked him, one with a forced smile, the other with eyes narrowed in suspicion. They did not greet her. They did not ask if she needed assistance. They simply looked her up and down and made a decision. She did not belong. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "I would like to review the new fleet package." She placed her tablet gently on the counter, her eyes never leaving the director's. The man laughed softly, but not kindly. "Fleet package? Those are not for public browsers. Those are multi-million-dollar contracts. Perhaps you meant to say you wanted a brochure." He tapped the glossy booklet on the counter as if to remind her of her place. The associates chuckled. One leaned toward the other and whispered just loud enough for her to hear. She probably just wants a selfie with the cars. The words were meant to sting, to reduce her presence to a tourist's distraction. She did not answer. She had no need to. Her silence pressed harder than any rebuttal. The young assistant at the corner desk glanced up again, uncertainty etched across her face. She had seen this pattern before, but never this openly, never this brazenly. The director folded his arms, puffing his chest as if the room's authority rested entirely on him. I am going to be direct with you. These deals are not meant for people who walk in off the street. This is a luxury showroom. We deal with real corporations, not... He let the word hang, unfinished, but his eyes made clear what he meant. Around them, a couple browsing the latest sedan shifted uncomfortably. They had come to admire the craftsmanship, not to witness cruelty. One of them muttered under his breath, "This is not right," but the director did not hear. Or if he did, he ignored it. The woman in orange reached for her tablet, tapping the screen with slow precision. Numbers glowed faintly on the surface, contracts and figures hidden from the crowd but clear in her mind. She did not look hurried. She did not look wounded. She looked like someone who had already seen the ending of this script and was simply waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. Her silence unnerved the director. He expected begging, or protest, or anger. Instead, he found a wall of composure he could not dent. His smirk faltered, only for a moment, before he snapped at the associates. "Escort her to the exit. We do not waste time here." But the order hung in the air, unanswered, because already phones were rising. A young man near the back had his camera trained on the scene. A middle-aged woman in a navy coat whispered to her companion, "This feels wrong. I am recording this." The showroom was still shining, still immaculate, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was no longer just about cars, it was about dignity. And in that silent battle, the woman in orange was already winning. The director's order did not vanish into the marble. It landed on the ears of the two sales associates who shifted uneasily, caught between obedience and hesitation. One of them, a man in his 30s with slicked-back hair and a smirk that never quite reached his eyes, decided to play the role his boss demanded. He stepped forward with exaggerated confidence, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Ma'am," he said, his tone thick with false courtesy, "we need to keep this space clear for real customers. Please, take your things and step outside." His hand motioned toward the glass doors as if he were dismissing a nuisance rather than speaking to a guest. The second associate, a younger woman with sharp eyeliner and an even sharper smile, added with a chuckle, "She probably cannot even pronounce the names of these models. Come on, sir, let us not waste the showroom's time." Her words slipped out like venom masked as humor. The director folded his arms and nodded, enjoying the performance. "Exactly. We cannot let people like this disrupt the flow. Security," he called, his voice carrying across the polished hall. From a side door, a uniformed guard appeared. His steps were slow but heavy, the kind of gait that suggested this was not the first time he had been summoned for theater rather than necessity. Guests turned to watch. The hum of background jazz now seemed too soft, swallowed by the weight of what was happening. The woman in orange did not move. Her tablet rested calmly on the counter, her hand still touching its screen with deliberate patience. She lifted her gaze toward the approaching guard, her expression unchanged. No fear, no apology. Just the steady look of someone measuring the seconds until truth revealed itself. The guard hesitated. He had expected a scene shouting, flailing, a struggle. Instead, he saw a woman standing taller than the insult itself. His eyes flicked toward the director for confirmation. The director, irritated by even that hesitation, barked, "Remove her, now." The young assistant at the side desk finally stood. Her voice trembled at first, but conviction hardened each word. "Sir?" She asked about the fleet package. "That is not a random question. It is a corporate account inquiry." Her interruption cracked the director's composure like a stone against glass. He spun toward her, face flushed. "You stay out of this if you value your job." The words came like a whip, silencing her for the moment, but not erasing the truth she had just spoken. Across the showroom, a man in a gray blazer raised his phone higher. "I am streaming this," he announced to no one in particular, but the ripple it caused was unmistakable. Guests began whispering, eyes darting between the director and the woman he was trying to expel. Some shook their heads, some looked away. But more than a few stayed focused, sensing that something bigger than cars was unfolding. The associate with the slicked-back hair stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Just walk out quietly." His tone dripped with the confidence of someone who thought the outcome was guaranteed. But the woman in orange did not yield. She shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself as if the floor itself belonged to her. She looked at him, not with anger but with a kind of quiet pity. That silence pressed against him harder than any protest. For the first time, his smirk faltered. The director, desperate to reclaim control, slammed his hand against the counter. The sound echoed like a gavel. "This is a luxury showroom. We will not be scammed by people playing dress-up. Escort her out." His words rang through the space, loud enough for every guest to hear. Phones rose higher. The air thickened. The insult had escalated into spectacle. What began as a private dismissal had become a public judgment. And yet, through it all, the woman in orange stood unbroken, her silence speaking louder than every cruel word thrown her way. The guard's shadow stretched across the polished floor as he moved closer, yet the woman in orange remained steady, as if her feet were anchored to the stone beneath her. Every insult had been loud, every order sharp, but her silence was louder still. It wrapped itself around the room, forcing even those who had laughed a moment ago to fall quiet. She did not flinch when the guard reached the edge of the counter. She did not turn when the associate repeated his command to leave. Instead, she drew a slow breath and placed her hand flat on the tablet. The faint glow of its screen lit her palm, but she made no move to open it. Her restraint was not hesitation. It was control. The director misread that silence. He leaned across the counter, his voice dripping with mockery. "What is the matter? Nothing left to say?" "That is what I thought." His words landed like stones tossed into water, but the ripples they made did not reach her. She looked at him at last, her gaze calm, her tone even. "Are you certain you want to continue this?" The question was not raised in anger. It was laid down like a marker, a chance for him to step back before the inevitable. The director laughed, dismissive. "I am certain. This showroom is not for you. It never will be. Security. Finish it." The guard shifted uneasily. He was a professional, trained to handle disruptions, but this did not feel like one. He glanced at the guests, at the phones lifted high, and at the assistant still frozen at her desk. Something in the air warned him that this was not an ordinary removal. The woman in orange did not argue. She did not plead. She did not raise her voice. Instead, she allowed the silence to expand until it pressed against the walls of the showroom. That silence was not weakness. It was the pause before a verdict. Memories flickered through her mind, uninvited yet sharp. She was 20 years old, standing in a bank lobby, holding her first commission check. The teller had looked at her ID, then at her skin, and said, "We will need to verify this with a manager." She had waited 2 hours, watching men walk past her with no questions asked. That humiliation had carved itself into her resolve. She had vowed never again to let silence mean surrender. Now, years later, silence was her blade, honed by time and wielded with precision. She let it hang in the air, forcing every person in the room to feel the weight of their own complicity. The young assistant shifted again, finally breaking. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but the words were clear. Her request was valid. She asked for the fleet package. "I saw the entry this morning." The room stiffened. The truth had slipped out, undeniable and dangerous. The director's head snapped toward her, his face flushed with anger. "One more word and you will regret it," he snarled. But the damage was already done. Guests whispered more openly now. The man in the gray blazer whispered into his phone, "They are pushing out a corporate buyer. This is not going to end well for them." Through it all, the woman in orange did not move. Her stillness was not defeat. It was power contained, waiting. She stood as though the floor itself answered to her, her silence echoing louder than any insult hurled her way. And with every second that passed, the balance of power in the room shifted, inch by inch, in her direction. The room was no longer only a showroom. It had become a stage, and every guest inside knew they were watching something larger than a dispute over cars. The director still clung to his authority, but it slipped with every second of silence from the woman in orange. Near the back, the teenager steadied his phone, whispering into the microphone, "This is happening right now. The director just told her she cannot afford to touch the cars." His live stream comments began to climb in number, messages rolling across the screen from people who had never stepped foot inside this showroom, but who were now witnesses all the same. A middle-aged woman in a navy coat angled her phone higher, capturing the guard's hesitation. "I cannot believe this," she murmured to her companion, who replied softly, "Keep recording. People need to see it." Their voices were low, but the conviction in them carried. The young assistant behind the desk gripped her chair, her knuckles white. She had spoken once and been silenced, but the truth burned in her chest. Her eyes darted to the woman in orange, who met her gaze briefly. In that wordless exchange was recognition of courage unspoken, of dignity that demanded to be defended. The director slammed his hand against the counter again, louder this time, trying to drown out the growing unease. "Enough," he barked. "Escort her out before this becomes a circus." His voice echoed, but his certainty cracked. He could feel the weight of the cameras, of the whispers, of the judgment he could not control. The woman in orange adjusted the strap of her bag, her movement deliberate, unhurried. Her eyes swept the room, landing not on the director but on the witnesses who now stood taller, phones raised like lanterns in a darkened hall. She did not speak, yet in that glance she invited them to stand with her. The guard took another step forward, but then froze as a guest in a gray blazer spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "You are about to put your hands on a corporate buyer. Think carefully." His words cut through the air, shifting the balance. Murmurs rippled across the room. A man in a tailored suit shook his head and said to no one in particular, "This is discrimination, plain and simple." Another guest whispered, "I will never buy from here again if this is how they treat people." The director's jaw tightened, but the tide of opinion was moving against him. The assistant could not hold back any longer. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping the floor. "Her name is in the system. I saw it. Fleet package, $6 billion in value. She is not lying." Her voice trembled but carried across the marble like a bell. Gasps broke from the crowd. Phones shifted to capture her words. The teenager's live stream lit up with comments. "$6 billion? Did she just say $6 billion? The director's face drained of color, but he forced a sneer. "Do not believe her. This is a scam. People like this always try to cheat the system." That phrase, "people like this," landed heavier than the insult before. A gray-haired man near the champagne table muttered, "I cannot believe he said that out loud." Another guest turned to the camera, shaking her head. This is exactly why people record, so they cannot deny it later. Through it all, the woman in orange remained still, her silence pressing harder with every witness who spoke. The director thought he was tightening control, but in truth, every word he uttered tightened the noose around his own authority. The witnesses were no longer passive, they were participants. And their phones were rewriting the story he thought he controlled. The guard lowered his hands slightly, uncertainty plain on his face. The director snapped at him, furious. "Do your job!" But the guard hesitated, glancing again at the glowing screens, at the crowd that now seemed less like onlookers and more like a jury. The woman in orange finally lifted her hand from the tablet, not to open it but to rest it calmly at her side. Her silence had held the room long enough. It was time to shift from patience to precision. The witnesses had spoken, the cameras were ready, and the next move would not belong to the director. The director's face burned red, not from embarrassment but from rage. He could feel the eyes on him, dozens of them, along with the phones held steady like witnesses that would never forget. Yet instead of softening his tone, he sharpened it into something crueler. He leaned forward, close enough that the edge of his cuff brushed the counter. His voice was lower now, venom disguised as authority. "You are wasting this showroom's time. People like you are not clients. You are frauds who think a nice dress and a fake story can fool us." Gasps rippled through the showroom. The words were not just an insult, they were an accusation. A couple near the sports car display exchanged shocked looks. The woman whispered, "Did he just call her a fraud?" Her companion nodded grimly, already raising his phone higher. The associate with the slicked-back hair jumped in quickly, eager to echo his boss. "Exactly. I have seen this before. Walks in with nothing. Claims to have money. Tries to impress. It is pathetic." He smirked, but his voice carried, and the smirk did not land the way he expected. Guests frowned. One woman muttered, "Pathetic is treating someone like this." The younger associate, the one with eyeliner sharp as a blade, folded her arms, and said with disdain, "If she really had $6 billion, she would not be standing here alone. She would have lawyers, assistants, contracts." Her laugh was brittle, forced, but it rang through the space like broken glass. The director straightened and spread his hands dramatically, as if addressing the entire room. "Look around. Does anyone here believe this nonsense? A corporate fleet contract? With her? I think not. This is a scam, and scams do not belong under these lights." Every word he threw was designed to erase her, to strip her dignity and paint her as an imposter. But the more he spoke, the more the tide shifted. Guests whispered openly now, voices overlapping. A man near the entrance said loudly, "That is theft and discrimination." Another replied, "He is going to regret this. It is all on video." The woman in orange finally moved, but not in the way they expected. She lifted the tablet and laid it flat on the counter, her fingertips resting gently on its edge. Her expression did not change. Her eyes were calm, her posture unshaken. She did not match insult with insult. She did not defend herself against lies. Instead, she let the weight of silence hang again, forcing the director's words to echo back against him. The young assistant could not stay seated. She rose once more, her voice stronger than before. "I saw her name in the system. Carter, fleet package entry, executive clearance." Her declaration rang out like a bell. Guests turned their cameras toward her. Some nodded. Others whispered, "She is telling the truth." The director snapped, his fury breaking through the last of his composure. "You are finished here," he shouted at the assistant. "You will be unemployed by the end of this day if you keep lying for her." The room reacted instantly. Several guests murmured in disapproval. One older man near the champagne table said firmly, "That is intimidation. This is unacceptable." Still, the director pressed forward, his desperation mounting. "You will not get a car. You will not get service. You will not even be allowed inside this showroom again. You are done. Get out." His finger jabbed the air toward the doors, his voice rising into a near shout. Yet in the midst of his tirade, she stood still, poised, dignified. The burnt orange dress caught the chandelier's light, a quiet flame against the cold marble. Her silence spoke louder than any of his insults. It was not weakness. It was a warning. And in that moment, the guests who once watched in confusion began to see the truth. The director had not humiliated her. He had humiliated himself. The director's anger boiled over, spilling into something harsher than words. His hand shot across the counter, snatching the glossy brochure she had been reviewing. The paper crumpled in his fist before he flung it to the floor as if it were trash. Gasps erupted across the room, the sound sharp against the silence that had lingered just moments before. "You think you can walk into my showroom and lie your way into a contract?" he shouted, his voice breaking the polished calm of the space. "Not today, not in my house." His declaration was not just arrogance. It was an attempt to erase her presence entirely, to strip away any dignity left by force. The associate with the slicked-back hair smirked, emboldened by his boss's fury. "She should be grateful we are even talking to her," he sneered. "Most places would have called the police already." His words hung in the air like a threat, and the younger associate nodded with a cruel smile. The director seized on that suggestion immediately. He slammed his palm down on the counter, the sound cracking through the showroom like a gavel. "Security, call the police. Tell them we have a fraudulent guest trying to access restricted contracts. Tell them she is refusing to leave." The guard froze. His radio crackled softly at his belt, but his hands stayed still. He looked from the director to the woman in orange, then to the guests, many of whom now stood with phones lifted high. His eyes betrayed hesitation, the uncertainty of a man who knew the situation was shifting beyond his control. The woman in orange did not move. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she adjusted the strap of her bag with deliberate calm, her silence louder than the director's shouting. To anyone watching closely, her composure was not passivity. It was preparation. A woman near the front, her gray hair tied back in a neat bun, spoke loud enough for all to hear. "She has not done anything wrong. This is harassment." Her voice trembled with outrage, and her phone remained fixed on the scene. The director turned on her, his anger wild now. "Mind your business," he snapped, his authority bleeding into desperation. "This is not your concern." But it was too late. The showroom was no longer his stage alone. Guests were speaking, murmuring, recording. The narrative he tried to control was slipping further with every raised phone, with every whispered protest. The young assistant stepped forward again, her voice breaking through the tension. Her name is in the system. You know it, Island. I saw it myself. This is wrong, and you know it. Her words were not just defiance. They were an indictment, public and undeniable. The director's response was to lash out harder. He jabbed a finger toward her, his voice a roar. You are finished. Out. Both of you out! He grabbed a stack of papers from the counter promotional sheets, contracts, nothing of hers, and flung them toward the floor near her feet, as if the mess could somehow erase the truth. Phones captured every second. Guests shifted uncomfortably, their unease turning into open disapproval. One man near the sports car display said firmly, You are going to regret this. This is all on video. Oh. The director's chest heaved with fury, but in the midst of his rage, the woman in orange stood unmoved. The chandelier light touched the curve of her cheek, her posture steady, her silence impenetrable. She had endured the insult, the accusation, and now the threat of police. Yet she did not falter. What the director did not understand was that every cruel gesture, every shouted order, was building not his authority but his downfall. And as the witnesses grew bolder, as the cameras multiplied, his own power shrank beneath the weight of his arrogance. The storm he thought he controlled was about to turn, and when it did, it would not be hers to weather. It would be his. The air inside the showroom felt heavier, charged with a tension that pressed down on every guest. The director's shouting still echoed against the marble walls, but it no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. The scattered brochures on the floor were not just paper. They were the evidence of his loss of control. The woman in orange finally moved. With deliberate calm, she lifted her tablet from the counter and tapped the screen. The glow lit her face, and for the first time she spoke more than a single question. Her voice was low but steady, clear enough for every person in the showroom to hear. Activate Fleet 6 protocol. The words were not shouted, but they struck like thunder. A moment later, the tablet responded with a faint chime, followed by the clipped voice of a woman on the other end. Fleet 6 confirmed. $6 billion in contracts will be withdrawn immediately. Do you wish to proceed? Gasps broke out across the room. The guests looked from one another to the director, whose face drained of color. The guard froze in place, his hands suspended above his belt. The associates glanced nervously at their boss, their smirks gone. The woman in orange did not hesitate. Proceed. Another chime sounded, final and cold. The assistant behind the desk covered her mouth with both hands. She knew what those words meant. The showroom director might not have believed it, but she had seen the numbers. $6 billion in contracts was not a rumor. It was the lifeline of their dealership network, the revenue that kept the lights above their heads burning. The director sputtered, his anger suddenly tangled with panic. You cannot do that. You do not have that authority. His voice cracked, the certainty gone. He leaned over the counter as if proximity could undo what had already been set in motion. She looked at him, calm as stone. I had the authority the moment I walked in here. You just did not recognize it. The words landed like a verdict. Guests murmured louder now, their disbelief turning into awe. The teenager whispered into his phone, She just canceled $6 billion. He is finished. His live stream comments flooded with reactions. This is history. Justice in real time. She is the CEO. The assistant, tears brimming in her eyes, whispered, It is real. She just pulled every contract. He has no idea what he has done. The director grabbed at the tablet, but she pulled it back effortlessly, not with haste, but with precision. He slammed his hand against the counter again, but the sound no longer carried weight. The room was no longer his. The woman in orange stood taller now, her posture commanding yet serene. You told me I could not afford to touch these cars. What you did not realize is that I paid for nearly half of them already, and now they are gone from you. A silence fell, but it was not the heavy, uncertain silence of before. It was the stunned silence of realization. The guard stepped back. The associates stared at the floor. Guests whispered openly, their voices filled with both outrage and admiration. The director's hands trembled as he jabbed a finger toward her. You cannot destroy me like this. You cannot. His words were frantic, almost pleading. She looked at him one final time, her eyes steady, her voice firm. Dignity is not for sale, but arrogance can cost everything. And with that, the countdown to his downfall had begun. The director's face was pale, his bravado stripped bare by numbers too large to deny. He searched the room for support, but the associates looked down. The guards stepped back, and the guests held their phones higher, recording every tremor in his voice. The woman in orange closed the tablet with a soft click and placed it back into her bag. She lifted her chin slightly, her presence commanding without a single raised word. "I am not here to browse," she said calmly. "I am not here to play dress-up. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Carter Global Logistics. My company operates the largest corporate fleet in the United States. For the last 5 years, your showroom has supplied nearly half of our vehicles." The declaration struck the room like a lightning bolt. Murmurs exploded into gasps, into disbelief that quickly transformed into certainty. The assistant nodded vigorously, whispering, "I knew it." The teenager shouted into his phone, "She is the CEO. She owns the contracts. It is real." The director staggered back a step, his mouth open but no words formed. The arrogance that had once filled his frame drained out of him, leaving only fear. He looked at her not as a nuisance, but as the executioner of his empire. She took one step closer, her heels firm against the marble. "You thought my silence meant weakness. It never did. It meant patience. And today, patience has ended." Phones captured her every word. Guests watched with wide eyes, some smiling, some shaking their heads in awe. The truth was no longer hidden. It was standing before them in a burnt orange dress, steady as stone, undeniable as fact. The director had wanted to erase her. Instead, she had erased him. The words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. Carter Global Logistics, $6 billion, Chief Executive Officer. The showroom that had mocked her now stood frozen, every witness pinned by the weight of her revelation. The young assistant at the desk clutched her chest, relief and vindication flooding her expression. She whispered to no one in particular, "She really is the CEO. She owns everything they depend on." The associate with the slicked-back hair felt his smirk crumble. He stepped back as if distance could erase the venom he had spilled minutes before. The younger associate's painted smile collapsed entirely, her arms folding tight across her chest as if to shield herself from judgment. Neither dared meet her gaze. The guard, who had once moved to escort her out, now lowered his eyes and shifted his stance. He knew there would be no arrest, no removal. If anything, he feared that staying too close might place him on the wrong side of history. The guests whispered louder now, their voices overlapping. "She owns the fleet." He insulted the CEO. $6 billion, gone just like that. Phones tilted from her to the director, capturing his unraveling in real time. The director himself stood at the counter, trembling hands clutching the edge as though it could hold him upright. The arrogance that once dripped from every word was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his empire collapse. His lips moved, but no sound came. She did not need to speak again. Her silence pressed on him like a verdict already delivered. In that silence, the witnesses judged him. In that silence, his empire cracked. And in that silence, he knew. The humiliation he tried to inflict had come full circle, multiplied, and now it was his own. The woman in orange stepped forward, her heels striking the marble like the toll of a clock nearing its final hour. She placed her hand once more on the tablet and spoke with calm precision. "Carter Global Logistics is hereby terminating all contracts with this dealership and its affiliates. Effective immediately, $6 billion in orders are withdrawn. Access to our fleet system is revoked." The confirmation tone chimed from her device, final and unyielding. The sound seemed to echo through the entire showroom, louder than the director's shouts, louder than the whispers that had filled the room minutes earlier. The assistant gasped, tears streaking her face as she whispered, "It is done. He just lost everything." Guests murmured in disbelief. $6 billion gone, one man repeated, his voice full of awe. "Just like that," another added, "this entire place is finished." The director's legs buckled. He gripped the counter as though it could anchor him, but it could not. The foundation of his arrogance had collapsed. His empire had been severed in a single sentence, a single command. He shook his head, his voice cracking into fragments. You cannot do this." Her gaze met his, steady and unflinching. "I just did." The guests erupted in hushed exclamations, their cameras capturing every word. The live-stream comments scrolled faster than anyone could read, flooding with cheers, with outrage, with vindication. Across the digital world, the truth was spreading. The guard stepped back entirely now, his eyes lowered in silent respect. The associates stared at the ground, their faces drained of color. The director alone remained trapped, clutching at the last threads of authority, but every thread had already snapped. The woman in orange closed her tablet and slipped it back into her bag. Her voice carried one last order, cold and absolute. Shut them out of the system, permanently. And with that, his downfall was sealed. The room had fallen into a silence so deep that even the soft hum of the showroom lights seemed deafening. The director, once towering with arrogance, now sagged against the counter, his empire erased by the very woman he tried to dismiss. The guests no longer looked at him. Their eyes followed her, the woman in orange, who stood with the calm presence of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to command respect. She turned toward the doors, her heels striking steady notes across the marble. The crowd parted instinctively, giving her passage not out of fear but out of reverence. Phones followed her every step, capturing not just the collapse of a man but the rise of a truth too long ignored. At the threshold, she paused, her voice carried across the space, low and deliberate. Money cannot buy dignity, but dignity, once denied, can strip an empire to dust. The words hung in the air like scripture. Guests nodded, some whispering, some simply staring in awe. The assistant at the desk wiped her tears and whispered. She turned silence into power. The teenager behind the phone shouted to his viewers, "This is what justice looks like. You are watching it happen." Oh, the director sank lower, his hands shaking, his empire already unraveling beyond the walls of the showroom. The live stream would ensure his humiliation reached far beyond this night, while her presence, her restraint, and her final words would echo far longer. She stepped through the glass doors, the burnt orange dress catching the city lights outside. She did not look back. She did not need to. The verdict was complete. And in the silence that followed her exit, every witness understood. True power never shouts. It simply stands, unshaken, until arrogance destroys itself.